It was supposed to be just another weekend ride with Josh, my long-time biking buddy. We planned this trip for weeks, excited to tackle the sprawling rocky dirt trails and thick woodlands the Appalachians were known for. The mountains offered everything we loved: challenging rocky paths, rolling hills, and stretches of trail that weave through the towering trees. It was perfect, an escape from the grind of daily life. The day started out like any other ride. We set out mid-morning by car, arriving at a small car park leading into the trail. We pulled our bikes out and set off, navigating the uneven terrain with ease, laughing and competing to see who could handle the steepest inclines. The hours flew by as we tore through the trails, stopping occasionally to admire the scenery and catch our breath. By late afternoon we were deep into the woods, surrounded by nothing but the sounds of nature, the chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves, and the occasional distant call of some unseen animal. It was peaceful, exactly what I had hoped for. But as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the forest floor, the atmosphere started to shift. There was something about the fading light that made the woods feel different, heavier, quieter. The air seemed colder, even though the temperature hadn't dropped much. Josh noticed this too. "Feels kinda weird out here now," he said, his voice breaking the silence. I shrugged it off. "It's just the light changing, probably messing with our heads." Josh didn't look convinced, but he let it go. About an hour before sunset, my bike chain slipped. We decided to stop so I could fix it, and Josh used the brake to pull out a granola bar and take a sip from his water bottle. I worked quickly now, not wanting to lose much daylight. "Maybe we should head back to the car once you're done. We're losing daylight fast," Josh said with a weary voice. "Yeah, makes sense," I replied, glancing at the sky. The car was about a 20-minute ride away, and I figured we'd make it back with just enough light to spare. Moments later, as I was still in the process of adjusting my bike chain, a low, haunting howl echoed through the trees. It wasn't like anything I'd heard before. It wasn't a wolf or a coyote, and it definitely wasn't a dog. The sound was sharp and guttural, almost human but not quite. Josh froze, his eyes wide. What the hell was that? I shrugged, trying to play it cool, though my pulse quickened. Probably just some animal we don't recognize. The howl came again, louder this time, closer. "Let's get out of here," Josh said, his voice tense. "Hold on a second," I said, gesturing for him to wait. A part of me wanted to identify the sound, to rationalize it. But then the forest went silent, dead silent. The birds stopped chirping, and even the usual hum of insects vanished. It was the kind of silence that made your skin crawl, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. Then we saw it. About 80 or 90 feet down the path, a creature emerged from the bushes. It was a whitish grey, almost unnaturally so, and painfully thin. It moved on all fours, but it had an eerie, fluid motion. Its limbs were too long, its joints bending in ways that didn't seem natural. It stood still for a moment, its head tilting slightly as if it was observing us. I felt my chest tighten and my heart thudding. "What is that?" Josh didn't wait for me to finish. "Just go." We didn't need to discuss it further. I snapped the chain back into its place as fast as I could, and we both jumped on our bikes. Adrenaline surged as we pedalled harder than we ever had, tearing down the trail towards the car. I didn't dare look back, but I could hear Josh's panicked breathing in front of me and the pounding of my heart in my ears. The trees blurred past us as we raced through the fading light. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent a jolt of fear through me. I kept expecting to see that creature again, keeping pace with us, or worse, cutting us off. But no matter how many times I glanced over my shoulder, the path behind us was empty. Finally, we reached the clearing where we had parked. We didn't say a word as we threw our bikes into the back of the car, our hands shaking and our breaths ragged. The only sound was that howl again, faint but unmistakable, carrying through the air like a warning. Josh jumped into the driver's seat, and I barely had time to shut the passenger door before he peeled out of there, gravel crunching under the tyres. We didn't stop driving until we were out of the mountains, the dark woods receding in the rear-view mirror. Even now I don't know what I saw that night. Was it some kind of prank, a weird undocumented animal, or something else entirely? Something that doesn't belong in the natural order of things. I've replayed the encounter in my mind hundreds of times, searching for an explanation, but none of them felt right. Josh and I still ride together, but we've made a deal. No more evening rides in the Appalachians. Whatever that thing was, we don't want to risk meeting it again. The trails we love so much are still a source of joy and adventure, but that night reminded us of something important. The world is vast, and there are places where reason and logic don't always hold sway. Sometimes the things we don't believe in find a way to make themselves known, and sometimes it's better to leave those things dead alone. My name isn't important. For this, I prefer to remain anonymous. What matters is my story. It's one I wish I didn't have to tell, but maybe sharing it will help someone else out there avoid what I went through. I've always been independent. I live alone in an apartment building in New York City. I like my solitude, and for as long as I can remember, I've always enjoyed cycling. It's my escape and my fitness routine rolled into one. Riding my bike to work each morning and back home every evening gave me a sense of freedom I didn't find anywhere else. The city buzzed around me, but I could just pedal past it all, watching the same friendly faces I'd grown accustomed to seeing on my route. There was an old man who always swept the front of his shop, rain or shine, a teenage girl walking a golden retriever before school, the barista setting out chairs outside the cafe on the corner. It felt comforting in a city that could be so chaotic. The first time I saw him, I didn't think much of it. A guy in a hoodie riding a small BMX bike, nothing unusual in a city like New York. But then I kept seeing him, almost every day. He'd been a few yards behind me in the morning, and again in the evening. At first I brushed it off. Coincidences happen, right? It's a big city. But as the days turned into weeks, the patterns became undeniable. He never interacted with me, never said a word, just followed. His BMX was old and scuffed, the kind you'd see a teenager riding, but he wasn't a kid. His hoodie was always pulled tight, and he wore a face covering, which, again, wasn't all that unusual. Still, there was something about his presence that felt wrong. I started feeling paranoid. I'd changed my route to work, but he'd always seem to find me. I'd leave earlier or later, but there he'd be, trailing behind me like a shadow. I told myself I was imagining things. You're overthinking this, I thought. He's just another person in the city. But that's when I saw him outside my apartment. It was late, past midnight. I was getting ready for bed when I happened to glance out the window. There he was, sitting on his BMX bike, hood up, staring up at my window. My stomach dropped. I told myself it could be a coincidence. Maybe he wasn't looking at me. Maybe he was just loitering. But deep down, I knew. That wasn't the last time. My Ring doorbell camera began going off at odd hours. I checked the footage, and there he was, pacing the hallways outside my door, his face always covered, but I knew it was him. I could just tell by the way he moved, the BMX that was leaning against the wall behind him. He never knocked, never said anything, just paced back and forth, like he was working up the courage to do something. I called the police that night, but the time they arrived, he was gone. The officers were polite, but not particularly helpful. They told me to be cautious and keep my doors locked. Thanks, like I hadn't thought of that already. The next morning he was back on his bike, trailing me to work as if nothing had happened. For weeks this went on. My life became a nightmare. Every shadow, every creak in the hallway made my heart race. I stopped riding my bike to work and started taking Ubers. But even that didn't feel safe. I felt trapped. My own apartment, my sanctuary, felt like a cage. And what was worse is I felt like I couldn't keep riding my bike, the thing that I love to do the most. Then, one afternoon, I saw something that made my blood run cold. I was coming home from work, and I approached the building. I spotted him. He didn't see me this time. He was too busy unlocking a door that led into an apartment on the floor below mine. He lived there. The realization made me feel sick. All this time, he'd been so close. He wasn't just some random stalker following me from the distance. He was my neighbour. He'd been right under my nose this whole time. I went straight to the police, shaking as I handed them the videos from my Ring doorbell, and I told them everything that I'd noticed. This time they took me seriously. They arrested him the next day. The details of what they found still haunt me. His apartment bedroom walls was covered in photos of me. Some were taken while I was biking, others while I was out with friends, and even more printed from my social media accounts. Hundreds of them. I felt sick, violated. How long had he been watching me? How much of my life had he catalogued without me even knowing? He was charged under anti-stalking laws. I pressed charges, determined to make sure he faced justice. But justice didn't feel like justice. He was fined and sentenced to 12 months in jail. A year? That was it. A year for turning my life upside down, for making me afraid to be in my own home, and for stealing my sense of security. I couldn't stay in that apartment. The thought of walking past his door, knowing that he'd possibly be back in a year, was unbearable. I broke my lease, packing my things, and moved to the other side of the state. It wasn't easy starting over, but I couldn't stay in a place that had become tainted with fear. These days I'm more cautious. My social media is now private, and I only accept friend requests from people I know personally. I've installed more cameras around my new home, and keep a close eye on my surroundings. I've even started taking self-defense classes. I still ride my bike though. I refuse to let him take that from me. Cycling is my freedom, my peace. I won't let it be ruined. If you're reading this, trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. And be careful with what you share online. You never know who is watching. Alright guys, if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.